We're used to fearing strangers, but my son almost died at the hands of the very people who sat at our dinner table. While I called 911 in tears, staring at my boy's blue face, my father calmly sipped his coffee and said the child was just pretending. He knew my brother had drugged 7-year-old Leo. He knew this was just a rehearsal to seize a $4 million inheritance. But they missed one thing. I've already traveled through 3 states, gathered evidence of their past crimes, and set a trap for them right on stage, in front of hundreds of cameras. The holiday gala had just wound down when I pulled my SUV out of the downtown Denver garage and into a biting, freezing sleet. My name is Clara Vance. I'm 36, a senior director at a major biotech firm, and a single mother. My 7-year-old son, Leo, usually stays with my father whenever my work schedule bleeds into the night. I turned onto our quiet, darkened street, my headlights sweeping across the front porch, and the world simply stopped. Leo was crumpled on the top step like a discarded marionette. His small body was twisted at an unnatural angle, his face a ghostly white, his lips tinged with a terrifying shade of violet. His chest was barely moving in shallow, desperate hitches. My brother, Julian, was leaning against the brick wall with his arms folded, a faint, lazy smirk on his face. "Just roughhousing," he said, offering a casual shrug. My father and his wife stepped out from the shadows of the foyer, looking as calm as if it were a quiet Sunday morning. "He's fine," my father said, his voice devoid of any urgency. "Boys fall down, Clara." I hit the wet concrete on my knees, my evening dress soaking through instantly. My fingers were shaking so violently I could barely navigate the screen to dial for help. "My son isn't moving," I sobbed into the line. "He's only 7. Please, send someone." The ambulance arrived in 9 agonizing minutes. The lead paramedic took one look at my brother, and I watched the color drain from his face. He checked Leo's vitals quickly, then pulled me aside, his voice a low, urgent hiss. Is that man really your brother?" I nodded, my mind spinning in a blur of confusion and terror. Because 4 years ago in Ohio, I responded to a call to a scene that looked exactly like this, the medic whispered. Same collapse, same story about a fall, and that man was standing in that exact same spot, wearing that exact same smirk. If you ever believed that family was a sanctuary, that blood would never dream of shedding its own, what I discovered that night will shatter that illusion forever. I slammed the car door and ran through the freezing rain, my heels skidding on the slick pavement. The porch light was throwing long, distorted shadows, making the house look wrong, too still, too cold. Leo lay there like a broken toy. His backpack was still on his shoulders, one shoe missing, his small chest rising in tiny, panicked jerks. Julian just watched me, leaning back against the brickwork. He had worn that same arrogant expression since we were teenagers. "Just messing around," he said. "The kid is being dramatic." My father stepped further onto the porch, his wife right behind him in a silk robe, clutching a mug of tea. "He's fine," Dad repeated, his voice flat and stony. "Boys play rough." His wife gave a small, rehearsed nod. "He probably just had the wind knocked out of him," she added. My bag hit the ground, spilling its contents into the puddles. I dropped beside my son, my hands trembling as I searched for a pulse at his neck. It was there, weak, thready, like a flickering candle. I fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it twice. "My son is unconscious on the porch. He's barely breathing. Please hurry." The dispatcher kept me on the line, her calm questions anchoring me while I kept one palm on Leo's chest, counting every shallow rise. When the sirens finally screamed up the street, those 9 minutes felt like a lifetime. 2 medics burst from the rig. The lead, a man named Miller, knelt immediately. His partner prepared the stretcher and the oxygen mask. Miller checked Leo's pupils and felt for a pulse, then his eyes drifted up to my brother, who was still leaning casually against the house. Miller's expression hardened. He stood slowly and walked toward me, lowering his voice. Is that really your brother?" I nodded, shivering. Because 4 years ago in Columbus, I rolled up on a call that was the mirror image of this one. Same collapse, same excuse about a spilled drink, same smirk. And that man was standing right there. Julian's smirk flickered for a fraction of a second, but then it settled back into place, even sharper than before. Miller turned to his partner with a sudden, cold professional intensity. Priority 1. Possible intentional overdose. Possible child abuse. Let's move. They lifted Leo onto the gurney. He looked impossibly small against the orange straps and the cold silver rails. I climbed into the back of the ambulance without waiting for an invitation, and Miller didn't try to stop me. As the doors began to close, I caught a glimpse through the small rear window. Julian was already on his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. My father and his wife stood beside him, their arms around each other, watching the ambulance pull away, as if they were observing a stranger's misfortune. Inside the rig, Miller hooked Leo up to the monitors and started in 4, his voice low and steady as the siren wailed above us. "I testified in that Ohio case," Miller said. "A 9-year-old boy. Massive dose of antihistamines. Same bruising pattern. The stepmother claimed he was clumsy. The charges were dropped on a technicality, and the family vanished a week later. I heard they headed west. I never expected to see that face again." Leo's hand was like a shard of ice in mine. Miller glanced at the heart monitor, then looked at me with a heavy, knowing gaze. "Does your brother travel much?" I couldn't find the words. In that moment, the truth began to crystallize. That smirk wasn't a sign of laziness. It was a rehearsal. The attending physician stepped into the sterile hospital hallway just as the sky outside the windows turned a pale, sickly gray. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the exhaustion of a woman who had seen far too much. "Your son is breathing on his own now," she said, guiding me into a small, private consultation room. "We've pumped his stomach and started aggressive fluids. The blood panel shows a massive level of diphenhydramine, an adult-strength overdose, combined with traces of a sedative and severe dehydration. There are also multiple bruises in various stages of healing. By law, we are required to file an immediate report with Child Protective Services and notify the police." I nodded, my throat too tight to offer anything more. She hesitated for a moment, then softened. "Leo is asking for you. He's awake." I walked into room 412 on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. My little boy looked impossibly small in the center of that adult-sized bed, a web of wires running from his thin arms and oxygen prongs tucked into his nose. The monitors kept a steady, rhythmic pulse, but the tempo was frantic, mirroring the racing of my own heart. When he saw me, his chin began to tremble. "Mommy." I sat on the edge of the mattress and gathered his cold hand into both of mine. "I'm right here, Leo. You're safe now." He began to speak in a raw, ragged whisper, his eyes wide and searching as if he were the one trying to protect me from the truth. "Julian said it was special juice. For the big kids. He said if I didn't drink it, he'd tell everyone at school that I still have accidents at night. It tasted bitter, like medicine." Then my arms and legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead, and I couldn't stand up. He swallowed hard, a tear tracing a path through the hospital grime on his cheek. He dragged me out to the porch, and pushed me down the top step. "He said he wanted you to see me fall the second you got home. He said it would make you cry and look crazy, and then Grandpa's money would belong to him." Every word felt like a fresh blade against my skin. Leo's eyes filled with fresh tears. I tried to be brave, Mommy. I'm sorry I drank it. I pressed his hand against my cheek, closing my eyes tight so he wouldn't see the sheer devastation in my gaze. You did everything right, baby. You were so brave. A nurse slipped in to check the line. I kissed Leo's forehead and walked back out to the waiting area, my grief hardening into a cold, sharp rage. Julian was sprawled in a plastic chair, scrolling through his phone with his feet propped up. My father, Howard, was leafing through an old magazine, as if it were a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Beatrice sipped at a cup of vending machine coffee, her legs crossed, looking perfectly composed. I stopped directly in front of my brother. What did you put in that juice, Julian? He didn't even bother to look up from his screen. Nothing. The kid is just looking for attention. My father closed his magazine with a heavy sigh. Clara, you're exhausted and overreacting. Julian was just playing with him. Beatrice added her own poison to the air. Leo has always been such a sensitive child. And you, dear, you simply work too much. You're stressed. I stared at the man who had once taught me how to ride a bike, now defending a monster. He's 7 years old, I said, my voice dangerously low. And you're calling a poisoning playing. Julian finally looked up, that practiced smirk firmly in place. Prove it. That single sentence snapped the last thread of my restraint. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person who could turn that challenge into a life sentence. Marcus answered on the first ring. It's me, I said, my voice steady with a fury that transcended fear. I need everything you can dig up on Julian Vance. Bank records, travel logs, encrypted messages, burner phones. Start tonight. Marcus didn't ask for a reason. He knew my voice. Send me a photo of his ID. I'll have the first file to you in 6 hours. I hung up and looked at the 3 people who shared my last name. Get out of this hospital, I told them. Do not call me. Do not text me. You are dead to us. Julian stood up, stretching lazily, as if he had all the time in the world. Good luck with that, sis. They walked away without a single backward glance toward the room where my son was fighting for his life. I returned to Leo's side and held his hand until the sun began to bleed over the Colorado horizon. My phone vibrated against the armrest just as Leo finally drifted into a deep, sedative-induced sleep. I slipped into the hallway so the noise wouldn't wake him. Marcus didn't waste time with a greeting. Screen share with me. Now? I opened the secure link he sent. The first folder was titled simply, Julian Master. Inside was a scanned document from our grandfather's revocable living trust, updated only 3 months ago, when his health began to fail. I scrolled to page 9, paragraph 14. The words chilled me to the bone. If at any time the primary beneficiary, Leo Vance, is determined by 2 licensed physicians to suffer from a chronic physical or psychological condition that impairs his future ability to manage the estate, the entire principal of $4,200,000 shall immediately vest in the next eligible male descendant, Julian Vance, free of trust. Julian had photographed the page himself. The metadata showed the image was captured inside the business office of the care facility in Boulder, 30 miles outside of Denver. Security footage Marcus had already pulled showed my brother entering the facility in a CU hoodie, signing the guest log under a false name, and leaving 20 minutes later. That same week, he had purchased a burner phone with cash at a convenience store in Aurora. And that same night, he had filled his tank and started driving east. His first stop had been outside Columbus, Ohio. He had checked into a budget motel under the name C. Reed, paying in cash. The next afternoon, a 9-year-old boy had collapsed in a park after being offered a drink by a friendly stranger. The hospital found massive levels of antihistamines. The case had been closed as an accidental ingestion. My brother wasn't just a predator. He was a scientist, and he had been practicing. Julian had driven south from Denver that same night, filling the tank of his black sedan and disappearing into the darkness. His first stop was Austin, Texas, 900 miles of open road. He had checked into a roadside motel under the name C. Reed, paying for 3 nights in cash, but slipping out after only 1. The following afternoon, a 9-year-old boy had collapsed in the parking lot of a grocery store after being offered a new brand of fruit punch by a friendly stranger. The hospital found levels of antihistamines that bordered on lethal. The mother had insisted her son never took medication, but the case was ultimately dismissed as an accidental ingestion. Then came Phoenix, Arizona. 300 miles further. A different fake ID, the same untraceable cache. An 8-year-old at a library's summer reading program was offered a special treat. Same collapse. Same drug. Same dead-end investigation. Then it was Salt Lake City. Then Albuquerque. Every single time, Julian had refined his process. He changed the dosage by a few milligrams, swapped the delivery drink, and altered his appearance just enough. He was calibrating. He was perfecting a recipe designed to make a healthy child appear mentally or physically unstable enough to trigger the trust's medical review clause, all without actually killing the boy, because a dead beneficiary was useless to him. Elias had compiled it all: toll tag pings, gas station surveillance of Julian pumping gas alone, pharmacy footage of him buying adult-strength allergy meds with cash, and motel logs showing he was always the sole occupant of his rooms. My father and Beatrice had never once been in the car with him. They hadn't helped him plan, and they hadn't touched the other children. But they had known. Julian had come home from that first Texas trip bragging over a steak dinner about how Phase 1 had been a success. They had listened, asked no questions, and whenever a news report mentioned a strange string of childhood illnesses, they simply changed the subject. They had protected him with their silence. Elias's final message popped up while I was still staring at the horrific timeline. He's been waiting for Leo to be old enough to trigger the review clause. Your son was the final exam. I closed the phone and walked back into room 412. I looked at my sleeping son and felt a coldness settle in my bones that I knew would never truly leave. Julian had spent months turning himself into a traveling predator just to steal money that was never his. And my own father had chosen to look the other way. I left Leo under the protection of 2 plainclothes deputies the hospital had assigned after the CPS hold, and I caught the earliest flight out of Denver. My first stop was Austin. I rented a nondescript car and drove to meet the first mother in a quiet park. Her hands shook as she handed over a notarized affidavit and a thumb drive. Her son, now 11, sat in the back of her car, watching me with eyes that seemed far too old for his face. He called himself Chris, she said. Gave my boy a bottle of soda in the park. 10 minutes later, he dropped like a stone. The doctors said it was the highest level of antihistamines they'd ever seen in a living child. The police called it an accident. I knew better. The drive contained footage from a neighbor's security camera. There was Julian in a gray hoodie, smiling as he handed the boy the bottle, then walking away, casually whistling. Second stop, Phoenix. I met another mother at a roadside diner. She slid a heavy manila envelope across the table, sealed with evidence tape. Inside were medical records, a toxicology report, and a pharmacy receipt Julian had accidentally dropped in a trash can, recovered by a janitor, who thought it looked suspicious. Her son had suffered from night terrors for nearly 2 years after drinking special punch from a nice man at the library. Third stop, Salt Lake City. The father met me at the curb, his jaw set tight. His son had been 9 when Julian offered him lemonade samples on their own front porch. He handed me an SD card from their doorbell camera, the original hospital lab results, and a signed statement. His voice cracked only once. Tell that son of a bitch he didn't win. Fourth stop, Albuquerque. The family invited me into their living room. The boy, now 10, sat on the sofa clutching a drawing he had made of the nice man with the blue cooler. The parents gave me the cooler itself, still sealed in an evidence bag, with the empty bottle inside. The lab report confirmed the same chemical signature. They also handed over surveillance footage from a gas station, showing Julian filling that very cooler with ice and powdered medication at 2 in the morning. Every family gave me the same 3 things: a sworn affidavit, medical proof, and time-stamped video of Julian acting entirely alone. I flew back to Denver with 4 sealed boxes of evidence and a soul made of lead. Elias met me at a climate-controlled storage unit he had rented under a shell company. We laid everything out across a folding table, the affidavits in chronological order, the medical timelines color-coded by state, and a map pinned with the exact mileage logs. The final piece was a voicemail Julian had left for the family attorney 3 months prior, recovered from a cloud backup. Hey, just a quick hypothetical. If my nephew ever got diagnosed with, say, severe chronic anxiety or something, and 2 doctors signed off that he couldn't handle the estate, the trust would default to me, right? Just asking for a friend. By the end of those 2 weeks, I had a federal evidence package 5 inches thick. Elias drove me to the FBI field office downtown. We carried the boxes in together and handed them over to a special agent. She flipped through the first folder, looked up at me, and said the words I had been praying for. This is airtight. We'll take it from here. I walked out of that building knowing the wheels of justice were finally turning. Julian still thought he was untouchable. He had no idea the storm had already reached his door. We laid everything out on a long folding table, affidavits sorted by date, medical timelines color-coded by state, a map marked with red pins and precise mileage logs. We had his digital footprint, too, Amazon order histories pulled via subpoena, and burner phone pings that traced his every move. The final piece was a voicemail Julian had left for the family's estate lawyer 3 months earlier, salvaged from a cloud backup. Hey, Mr. Sterling, just a quick hypothetical for you. If my nephew were to be diagnosed with, say, severe chronic anxiety or some kind of impairment, and 2 doctors signed off that he couldn't manage his affairs, the trust would default to me automatically, right? Just asking for a friend, obviously. The lawyer had kept the recording, just in case. By the end of those 15 days, I held a federal evidence file 5 inches thick. Elias drove me to the FBI field office downtown, and we carried the boxes inside together, handing them over to Special Agent Sarah Vance. She flipped through the primary folder, looked up at me, and said the only words I needed to hear. This is airtight. We'll take it from here. I walked out into the cold mountain air knowing the gears were finally turning. Julian still moved through the world as if he were untouchable, completely unaware that the sky was about to fall. The night of the Biotech Excellence Awards arrived with a sharp December chill and a canopy of brilliant stars. I stood in the green room of the Denver Convention Center, smoothing the fabric of my midnight blue silk gown. My reflection looked composed, but every nerve in my body was raw. The invitation had been sent 10 days prior, simple cream cardstock with gold embossed lettering. A private gala, and a champagne toast to honor Howard Vance's upcoming birthday. They had RSVP'd within the hour. Julian arrived through the private entrance at 6:45 p.m., looking sharp in a tailored black suit and a silk pocket square, his hair slicked back with practiced precision. He kissed my cheek, that same lazy, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. Big night, sis. I am proud of you." My father followed in a navy tuxedo, Beatrice on his arm in emerald satin that shimmered under the chandeliers. They posed for the official photographer I had hired, though the man behind the lens was working with FBI-calibrated equipment. Julian threw an arm around our father's shoulders, flashing a perfect, white-toothed smile, laughing at something Beatrice whispered. In the photos, we looked like the portrait of the perfect American family. I led them to the VIP table at the very center of the hall. I raised my glass to new beginnings, and Julian clinked his flute against mine with more enthusiasm than anyone else. The house lights dimmed for the opening presentation. 400 executives, investors, and journalists filled the room, and the live stream was already broadcasting to tens of thousands of viewers. My CEO took the stage, moving through the usual introductions before turning to the crowd with a wide grin. And now, for our 2025 Visionary of the Year, for the second year running. Clara Vance. The spotlight found me. The applause was deafening. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage, accepted the crystal trophy, and adjusted the microphone. The massive lead wall behind me flashed a stark, pure white. I offered the audience a smile I had practiced until my face ached. "This award doesn't truly belong to me," I began, my voice echoing clearly through the silent hall. "It belongs to every child who has ever been hurt by someone they were taught to trust." The first slide appeared. Julian at 19, hood up, paying cash for adult-strength medication in a Texas pharmacy. Second slide, Julian at 20, handing a plastic bottle to a young boy in an Arizona parking lot. Third slide, Julian in Utah, walking away from a collapsed child without looking back. Fourth slide, Julian in New Mexico, pouring white powder into a cooler in a gas station restroom. Fifth slide, Julian 3 months ago, his phone camera pointed at the inheritance clause in our grandfather's trust. Sixth slide, the clause itself, highlighted in blood red. Seventh slide, the transcript of his text to the lawyer. The entire room seemed to draw in a collective, horrified breath. From 4 different tables across the hall, 4 young men stood up. They were teenagers now, 14, 15, 16 years old. In perfect, haunting unison, they turned and pointed directly at the VIP table. "That's the man who poisoned me," the boy from Texas said, his voice trembling but resolute. The boy from Arizona stepped forward next. "He did it to me, too." The boys from Utah and New Mexico just stared, tears streaming down their faces. Julian's champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor. His smirk didn't just fade, it vanished, leaving his face a ghostly, sickly white. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Then, a raw, ragged scream tore from his throat. My plan was perfect. He bolted, shoving chairs aside and sprinting for the side exit. 2 agents dressed in tuxedos cut him off before he reached the door, taking him down hard. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silence. My father surged to his feet, shouting that they were making a mistake, while Beatrice shrieked my name like a curse, trying to claw her way toward Julian. 4 more agents moved in. My father was restrained for obstruction, Beatrice for acting as an accessory. Julian twisted on the floor, his face purple, spitting with rage. "You set me up. You jealous bitch." An agent pressed him back down into the marble. On the giant screen, the live stream counter ticked past 5 million viewers and continued to climb. I looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. This is what happens when you decide a child's life is worth less than an inheritance. The hall erupted into a cacophony of camera flashes and shouting. Julian was dragged out, still screaming, with my father and Beatrice weeping behind him. I remained on that stage until the last cuff had clicked shut. Then, I walked off, holding my trophy in one hand and my son's future in the other. I stayed on the stage until the final metallic click of the handcuffs faded into the stunned silence of the hall. Then I walked off, the crystal trophy in one hand and Leo's future in the other. As I descended the steps, the roar of 400 people rising in a wave of applause followed me out, but my mind was already miles away, back in room 412. 11 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Denver delivered the final reckoning under a leaden December sky. Julian Vance, barely 23, stood in an orange jumpsuit, his expression vacant as the clerk read the counts: 5 counts of attempted murder by poisoning across state lines, interstate transportation of controlled substances with intent to harm minors, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud a trust. The judge leaned forward, peering over his spectacles, and sentenced him to 40 years in a high-security federal penitentiary, with no eligibility for parole for at least 25. Julian didn't flinch. He simply stared at me throughout the entire proceeding, his lips curled into that same sharp, rehearsed smirk, until the marshals finally dragged him from the courtroom. Beatrice had taken a plea deal the week before. She was sentenced to 8 years for acting as an accessory after the fact and failing to report felony child abuse. She sobbed as the sentence was read, mascara staining her cheeks, as she begged the judge for a final moment to say goodbye to Julian. Her request was denied without a second thought. Howard stood last. The man who had once taught me how to ride a bike now wore silver handcuffs and looked a decade older than he had a year ago. He was given 6 years for misprision of a felony. He kept his head bowed, refusing to look at the gallery, but when the gavel finally fell, he looked up at me. I met his eyes for one frozen, hollow second before I turned my back on him forever. The trust was dissolved that same week under state fraudulent transfer statutes. The full $4.2 million was transferred into a new, irrevocable special needs trust with Leo as the sole beneficiary and me as the sole trustee. To ensure Julian would never see a cent of his ambition realized, a separate civil jury added $3 million in punitive damages, secured against any future earnings he might ever attempt to make. I filed the paperwork to change our legal names the very day the ink on the court order dried. We became Clara and Leo Rhodes. New birth certificates, new social security numbers, a clean break from a legacy of rot. We moved 3 hours into the mountains, settling into a quiet community where the air is thin and crisp, and where no one knows the names that used to haunt us. We found new schools, a new pediatrician, and a therapist who specializes in helping children navigate the impossible weight of betrayal. Leo still wakes up some nights, his voice cracking as he screams Julian's name, but those nights are becoming fewer and farther between. This past spring, he started playing Little League. When he hit his first home run and rounded third base, he pointed a gloved hand straight at me in the bleachers, wearing a grin so wide I thought his face might break. I sat there and cried harder than I did the night this nightmare began. My father wrote to me once from prison. It was 3 handwritten pages filled with justifications about how he was only trying to maintain family harmony, and how he never intended for anyone to actually get hurt. I read the first paragraph, walked out to the fire pit in our backyard, and watched the rest turn to ash. Leo roasted marshmallows over those same embers later that evening, asking if the orange glow was pretty. I told him it was the most beautiful fire we'd ever had. A birthday card from Beatrice arrived in June. I didn't even open it. I simply wrote, "Return to sender, addressee unknown," across the envelope in heavy red marker, and dropped it back in the mailbox. Julian's appeal was shot down in a 21-page opinion. The appellate judge described his conduct as some of the most calculated and depraved the circuit had ever seen. He isn't going anywhere. The other 4 boys, now young men, started a private group chat they call the Five. They play video games together, trade stories, and on the nights when the memories become too loud, they talk each other through the dark. They call me Aunt Clara, even though we share no blood. They call Leo their little brother. They are more of a family to us than the one we left behind. I kept my job. They gave me a promotion, a corner office with a view of the peaks, and the freedom to work remotely whenever Leo needs me. With the first grant from the civil settlement, I established the Lighthouse Fund, an anonymous emergency resource for single parents whose children are being targeted by their own relatives. In our first year, we helped 41 families relocate, change their names, and disappear into safety. Some evenings, I sit on the back porch and watch Leo chase fireflies across the tall grass. He caught one tonight, cupping it gently in his small palms before bringing it over to me. Look, Mom. It's still glowing. We opened our hands together and watched the tiny, flickering light rise into the vast Colorado night. It looked so small, yet so bright against the dark. Free. If you are listening to this and you suspect someone in your family is hurting your child, hear me clearly. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. And you are most certainly not alone. Record every detail. Save every scrap of evidence. Fight as if your child's life depends on it, because it does. Sometimes the monster doesn't hide under the bed or in the shadows of a closet. Sometimes he sits at your dinner table, wearing the face of a brother, a father, or a friend. Justice is possible, but only if you are brave enough to drag the monster out into the light. Leo ran up to me just now, his knees stained with grass and a jar full of tiny, pulsing lights. Can we let them go now? Yeah, baby, I whispered. Let them go. We unscrewed the lid together, and watched every single one of them blink away into the infinite sky.